Charlie Kirk never received any request from the Israeli government to accept $150 million. Like, no one said that. The initial story was Netanyahu was wrangling some of his friendly billionaires and millionaires in the US into a kind of consortium to get Charlie Kirk back on track and to fund him to the hilt in exchange for just shutting down all of the Israel criticism at TPUSA debates that exploded into the open at their summit in July. That seems to be borne out by reality and by what we saw by the follow-up story I did exposing the secret influencer summit with Bill Ackman. And first of all, Netanyahu wanted to claim Charlie Kirk's legacy because he's someone that was groomed by the Israel lobby. The Israel lobby and these Zionist billionaires had been sponsoring him since he was a teenager, and he was one of their most important Gentile assets. He became even more important after Trump was reelected. He was probably on his way to a Senate seat or possibly even the presidency, and he became more important after his death as a kind of martyr of the MAGA movement. You know, he was supposedly cut down for believing in free debate, and they need that base, the conservative grassroots, on their side because they recruit from them to, if they join the military or if they become important propagandists or politicians, they need them to drum up support for the next Israeli war, which requires white Christian men to die for the to fight and die for the self-proclaimed Jewish state. So that's why Charlie Kirk was so important. And then, the truth comes out that Charlie Kirk didn't like Netanyahu, considered him a bully and a manipulator, and that he didn't accept Netanyahu's offer for a trip to Israel, and that he was uncomfortable being a Gentile subcontractor, just pumping out Israeli propaganda, including in support of a looming war on Iran, which he would eventually lobby against inside the White House, something I reported. And Netanyahu freaks out. Then, you had this whole parallel development, which, I said in my first report, there is no evidence of an Israeli role in Charlie Kirk's assassination. I don't know who said that I said that there was one, but other people decided to push that narrative. And I can understand why they would suspect that, given Israel's obsession with assassinating every potential enemy, attempting to assassinate the entire Hamas negotiating team inside a U.S. ally. But I said there's no evidence, but it's, millions of impressions were created off of posts alleging that Charlie Kirk had been killed by Israel. So Netanyahu comes out and actually denies it. When have you ever seen a foreign leader deny killing an American public figure? And he did it twice. It was wild. Ben Shapiro even came out and denied an Israeli role. They were afraid. They were shaken. And then in my third piece, I reported that Charlie Kirk lost one of his top donors of all time, Robert Shillman, who is an ultra-Zionist fanatic and an anti-Islam funder who had sponsored also Laura Loomer. Laura Loomer was attacking Charlie Kirk in June. I think she was made uncomfortable by this revelation. She was like attacking me in a very sloppy way, characteristically sloppy way on Twitter. And I asked her, do you know about Robert Shillman defunding Charlie Kirk? Right before I was going to publish the story. And you could tell she got verklempt. She got really uncomfortable. So then after Netanyahu has to deny killing him, and the whole narrative of Charlie Kirk being Netanyahu's boy is shattered, and Bill Ackman is freaking out as well, because Charlie Kirk was screamed at by one of the participants in his secret influencer summit, which no one was supposed to know about, by the way. Bill Ackman said, well, we just had a meal last summer. Like, no, it was a little bit more than that. Their whole narrative's collapsing. And then this letter comes out, a digitally reproduced letter we had asked for it to come out. Like, I had called for Netanyahu to release this letter. Candace Owens had called for Netanyahu to release this letter because Netanyahu referenced it in one of his video eulogies to Charlie Kirk, but we didn't see the contents. And Bill Ackman is spinning the contents of it as proof that Charlie Kirk was a ride or die Israel guy to the end, as are other forces which claim to be anti-Israel, but seem to be insidiously advancing the Israeli narrative about Charlie Kirk. And if you look at the contents of the letter, it's Charlie Kirk complaining and whining about having to be this Israeli subcontractor and telling Netanyahu, you need to produce your own propaganda and, we'll help, but we don't want to be the main messengers. And it's making us look stupid because we're supposed to be America first. He also said, I don't support a war on Iran, and you need to do that yourself. You need to basically take more responsibility for Israel's messaging and stop basically paying all of these conservative incorporated influencers to do it for you. You're not allowed to do that. The letter actually shows that Charlie Kirk had crossed some red lines already, even as he espouses his belief in the so-called Judeo-Christian alliance. And so anyone who's trying to spin that letter as evidence of his just absolute pro-Netanyahu convictions is deliberately papering over the real subtext, which is that he was setting the stage for a breakup, and that the friction between himself and Netanyahu's mafia that extends into the US was going to intensify after that letter, which was supposedly authored in May, because it was in June that Charlie Kirk was lobbying against a war on Iran. And that's when he began falling under attack from Laura Loomer in June. Then July, he hosts a student action summit in Florida, where Tucker Carlson calls Bill Ackman a fraud and a con man, and Jeffrey Epstein a Mossad agent. Dave Smith debates the Gaza genocide. Charlie Kirk falls under even more intense attack, this time from two of Netanyahu's top cutouts in the media, Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro. Then the influencer summit, early August, the day after, Charlie Kirk goes on Megyn Kelly's show and complains that he has less latitude to criticize Israel than an Israeli does, and complains about stakeholders and funders, referring to people like ostensibly Bob Shillman. And then a month later, he's dead. So we obviously don't know where this would go, but I don't think they can put the genie back in the bottle here. Like, everybody knows that there was a conflict, and that's why Netanyahu, Israel's lobbyists in the U.S., and the Israeli foreign minister is committing so much money into basically buying supposedly anti-woke influencers and buying social media impressions on the right. It's because Charlie Kirk was emblematic of a larger trend of the Israeli PR collapse within the conservative grassroots.
Yeah, and I think that'd be concerning enough, everything that you just said, and there's a lot more. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to sit here for 5 hours and explain all the minutia of insanity that was going on behind the scenes, but for months on end. But, if that wasn't crazy enough, and then you also have the obvious lunacy of, the round that they claim killed Charlie Kirk, and a lot of questions about cover-ups at the FBI. Candace Owens has been digging into a lot of these seemingly glaringly obvious questions. I want to ask you one question, though, that I haven't seen anyone really address in a lot of detail. Maybe you don't have an answer, but there was a FBI statement that in the early hours of the assassination that foreign intelligence assisted in the manhunt investigation. Do you have any insight into what foreign intelligence could have been assisting and how they may have assisted in the investigation?
No, I tried to track that down and I just couldn't find anything on that. So I don't know, what was the source on that?
It was on one of those mainstream CBS or something. It was not Kash Patel, but I think it was like a deputy director or something. I initially heard it, and then I fact-checked it, double-checked it later, and turned out to be truthful. But I just thought that was weird always.
I wonder, I mean, I remember the Utah governor, who's actually kind of was like at odds with Charlie Kirk's faction of the GOP, said, we were hoping it was a foreigner who killed him, but unfortunately it was one of our own. And Benjamin Netanyahu himself blamed Islam and the radical left. So they had already kind of set their narrative. What they were wishing for was some kufiya-clad Palestinian radical doing it, which happens to be, by the way, the identity of the patsy in the 1998 Brian De Palma film Snake Eye, who kills I think, defense secretary named Charlie Kirkland in a sort of conspiracy that was hatched by someone deep within the U.S. military who wanted to cover up corrupt defense contracts. It's actually a really good film and some potential predictive programming. But I mean, they wanted to blame the left and enact this agenda that already seems to have been, it was like the Patriot Act was already prepared before 9/11 through various channels like the Louis Freeh Commission. And they had this whole agenda prepared to basically crack down on domestic dissent, implement more repression. And we still don't know the facts of we don't have the evidence that the public would need to convict Tyler Robinson in their minds. And we've learned that there is enormous amounts of discovery in this case, and the judge has put the discovery under lock and key, and the media is not allowed to access all the discovery. The thing that really set me off was the text messages, supposedly between Tyler Robinson and the furry roommate. Where is he, by the way? Or they, them, where are they? We're not hearing much from them. The text messages were like fabricated. They were,
which Tyler now allegedly, according to a source close to him, claims is true, that they were fabricated.
Yeah, and you can just read them. The language is like a 65-year-old law enforcement officer. I deposited the gun through the vehicle at the drop point, my love. Like there's no timestamps on any of it. And I think even the New York Times acknowledged they were forensically reproduced. Remember when Kash Patel said, we had a manifesto, but it got lost, and so we forensically reproduced it? I mean, I think this may have been the manifesto, and everything is conveniently confessed in this exchange. Then when CNN reported it, they reproduced it through a graphic that made it look like you were actually viewing the physical iPhone screen but without timestamps. So CNN altered it to make it more believable. So this already, I mean, you don't have to go that far down the rabbit hole to start asking questions. But I wasn't able to really pursue the thread of foreign intelligence assisting the investigation. If we found out somehow that Israeli intelligence had assisted, then, that would also be a red flag, because we can see what the Mossad or other wing of Israeli intelligence did in Australia, where there was a string of very mysterious arsons outside synagogues carried out, it turned out, by non-ideological criminal elements and local miscreants who were recruited online and paid cryptocurrency with instructions to carry out various acts of sabotage outside Jewish targets. Only one nation benefits from that. And then Iran was ultimately blamed with an assist from Israeli intelligence to ASIO, the Australian Security Organization. So Israel basically said, Iran did it. Look at Iran. Who made it? Remember all those phone calls that were sent into Jewish community centers at the beginning of Trump's first term and caused mass panic and all this anti-Semitism hysteria was directed at Trump? there was also at the same time a wave of bomb threats and phone calls to Jewish community centers in Australia. And the Australian security services found that they were coming from Israel. And it turned out it was an Israeli teenager making most of these calls. And his identity was hidden for quite a while. But now we know who he is, and only one nation benefits from that. So again, I have no idea about foreign intelligence assisting Charlie Kirk, but anyone who's paying close attention has serious skepticism about the official story right now.
Well, I think anyone except for the people being paid minimum $7,000 per post on Twitter or Instagram. Now, anytime I post on TikTok, I can't even use TikTok anymore because every single video just gets flagged and taken down. I'm sure they'll ban it soon. This is crazy. It's like Twitter really is our only last bastion of somewhat free speech, and it seems like it's a total takeover.
Yeah, and you were kicked off YouTube as well, right?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's a takeover. By the way, when I debated Deborah Leah Schwartzman, she lashed out at Candace Owens in the middle of the interview for complicating the Trump administration's ability to blame the left and ram through all of its repressive legislation. And she also called for me to be jailed for attending an on-the-record press event with the elected Iranian president, which was interesting. And I would assume she's part of this coterie of influencers that's been recruited by Israel, because she was in that meeting with Netanyahu where he openly called for war on the American public, psychological war, a media war, an information war, in which billionaires that he hand selects or who he's friends with or friendly with, I guess he doesn't really have any actual friends, take over major media assets on behalf of Israel and shut down criticism of Israel and prevent American youth from seeing photos of all the children that Israel shreds every day in Gaza. And that's happening with TikTok. We have 2 strikes on TikTok at the gray zone already. Like, they've already implanted various pro-Israel censors there. The strikes are for like the most benign activity. I don't even know what they're for. We have no hope on TikTok. Mm-hmm. But the new CEO at TikTok is Safra Katz, someone who's exposed in the Handala leaks. That's the name of a apparently Iranian hacker collective that hacked Ehud Barak's emails, the former Israeli prime minister and defense minister, showing him communicating with Safra Katz about defending Israel, supporting Israeli objectives in the U.S. going back to 2015. I think she's a veteran of Israel's Unit 8200. I might need to double check that. Then the purchase is presided over by Oracle. They're providing the infrastructure. This CIA data contractor run by Larry Ellison, who is a friend of Netanyahu, has hosted Netanyahu on his private island in Hawaii, donated to the Friends of the IDF, diehard Zionist. His son, David Ellison, is a Zionist fanatic. He's taken over Paramount Pictures, which is putting out an October 7th propaganda documentary in a few days, and installing Barry Weiss, the voice of the Zionist 1%, as editor of CBS News, which is a Paramount property. And I think they're going to make a bid on CNN. And we've always seen all of these legacy media, corporate media assets as pro-Israel propaganda mechanisms. But now they can't allow for any criticism at all, any debate, because the press, like the news departments at every legacy media outlet, the news departments can no longer stomach Israeli propaganda. And especially the younger people working in these news departments. And so they need to actually like crush the news departments and start to recruit from within the conservative incorporated world that has been heavily cultivated by Israel and its cutouts in the US to make sure that nothing gets through. And what's the ultimate effect of this going to be? Okay, we're going to be censored. We're going to be suppressed algorithmically, but we're not going to be silenced. And I think there will be a mass exodus from Twitter. We've already seen corporate media just be completely tuned out by an entire generation. There's nothing they can do to win back that trust. What they're going to do is eliminate the trust altogether. And they'll find us somewhere. We just have to maintain some presence.
Maybe they'll find a place at CBS for Brylan Hollyhand. I think he's looking for a job. He needs to get his own private jet. He can't be flying around on his dad's. It's not a good look.
It'll be like, him and Ben Shapiro and what's that guy, Matt Walsh. It'll be like The View.
It'd make for great content, to be honest. It'd be plenty of content for all of us to make fun of. So,
I mean, it's probably inappropriate to say it, but that's kind of like what Charlie Kirk was up until last summer for all of us. It was like, this is the voice of Conservative Incorporated. And I think he was embarrassed by that.
Yes. And that was the first thing that stuck out to everyone is like Netanyahu went out and tweeted, I invited Charlie to Israel. Now that trip's never going to happen. That was the second tweet he put out after the assassination. And everyone was just kind of like, I don't think Charlie would have accepted that. I don't think he was that stupid because that'd be a career killer for him to go to Israel right now. And then it turns out that that didn't happen. And he literally went to Trump's office at the most critical point in Netanyahu's tenure of his entire life when you're about to get the U.S. into this war. And he's like, don't do it. You know, that takes serious balls. And for anyone to come out who claims to be anti-Israel and say, Charlie wasn't really anti-Israel at the end. It's like, I'm sorry, do you have the influence to go walk into the Oval Office and tell the president to fuck off and not go to war on behalf of Israel? It's crazy. It's crazy. Which, speaking of, I think we're about to get a second war on Iran. I think most people see that's cooking. You've got the THAAD systems being expanded by the U.S. and Israel. Or on U.S. bases somewhere nearby, something like that. You've got the some shipments of weaponry. You got a lot of stuff going on. They're coming out and saying it. You just met with the president of Iran, which according to Deborah Leah means that the gray zone is entirely funded by the Iranian government, I guess. So do you think that Donald Trump is cucked enough or blackmailed enough to the point where that he'll be forced into this again? Because everyone knows that IDF said that on the fourth day of the war, they were on the outs. And the only reason why they stayed in and continued is because they got the U.S. in. So I don't see how this could continue without the U.S. joining.
That's right. And my analysis will have that much more impact because, as Deborah Leah said, I'm so brilliant that I figured out how to work around the strangulation U.S. sanctions regime to, build this incredibly elaborate background behind me with Iranian oil money.
They try to compare it too. They're like, oh, Max Blumenthal interviewed a head of state, which is the equivalent of Deborah Leah meeting with Netanyahu as like his subservient slave who's getting paid. As crazy.
Yeah, I mean, she was the one who teed up Netanyahu so that he could call for war on the American public, an information war. It was an on the record press event there were 25 people there, journalists, think tankers, left and right, or the American conservative, I would say, would be the right, and very credible people. And Pezeshkian wanted to send the message that war is coming and that negotiations with the U.S. have proven fruitless. And so the reason to speak to us was to communicate more directly with the American people and with the anti-war movement in general, rather than speaking to like the mainstream press, whose audience is, the White House. And what's the point of speaking to the Trump administration? He said Steve Witkoff deceived them again and again and would show up at meetings with all this positive rhetoric about possibly a new JCPOA, and Iran would display all the flexibility they could about enrichment levels. And then he'd go back to Washington and read off the Israeli script and threaten Iran and issue demands. And this all led up to the unprovoked Israeli assault in June and the 12-day war, where they basically exploited the negotiations to lull Iran into a false sense of security. Pezeshkian said they're going to come again. For sure, they will attack again. And he forecasted his own potential assassination or an attempt on his life and said Iran is prepared for all contingencies. There are 5 or 6 steps. They're already 5 or 6 steps ahead of every move Israel could make. I think Iran's military doctrine proved itself after Israel delivered a pretty punishing opening blow, exploiting the Mossad cells that it had established inside Iran, as well as the sense that Iran, among the Iranian leadership, that they were heading into another round of talks with the U.S. that Saturday. So why would Israel do this? And, they did it, but the element of surprise is gone now. The Mossad cells have been depleted. I don't know how heavily penetrated Iran is, but they've been dismantling Mossad cells. They've been executing Mossad agents. They've been doing like massive deportations of Afghan migrants who they believe are sort of a base for Mossad recruitment. And so it's just going to be a more direct, violent, longer conflict in which, as we've seen, Israel will depend heavily, if and not entirely, on the United States. I would say entirely, to extricate itself from this conflict. But that's the point. The point is to keep the U.S. involved, to keep the U.S. from diverting its attention to Ukraine and then to the Pacific Rim and the coming war with China. And Israel wants deeper, more intense U.S. involvement in this war, more close, standoff combat between the Navy and Iran, even boots on the ground if they can get it. They would be more than happy to see boots on the ground and U.S. troops fighting the popular mobilization forces in Iraq, who Netanyahu explicitly threatened in his UN General Assembly speech. They would be happy to see this war expand back into Iraq, where there are U.S. military bases, and the popular mobilization forces have played a stabilizing role by merging with the Iraqi military, which has prevented operations on U.S. military bases. Netanyahu would be more than happy to see operations against U.S. military bases in Iraq. And that's where I think this is going. So we're seeing all of this increased activity around Al Udeid Air Base and U.S. tankers refueling so many jets, like as many jets as they can, halfway on their journey to the region. I don't know. Did a U.S. aircraft carrier pass through the Strait of Gibraltar? So there's been like a naval deployment. So it all seems to be moving towards an imminent attack on Iran. And, talking to friends in Iran, they believe that one is coming imminently.
Well, I pray that it goes horribly for Israel and the U.S. I say that from the bottom of my heart. And we all know, I think you're right about Iraq too, because they're coming under a lot of pressure. And the PMF committed the cardinal sin. They defeated ISIS, same as, Assad. So this is, it's really shaping up. But thankfully, we have journalists like you who are exposing the truth. And I can't say I'm a journalist, really, because I just jump the gun and immediately say that Israel is guilty of these things. You actually require evidence to back up your claims. You're not crazy like me. So I say, big salute to you and thank you for the work that you're doing. And you've really gotten under their fingernails, under their thumbs. Be very safe. Be very careful. If Charlie Kirk was a threat, which I think he was, obviously, be very careful. And you're in the belly of the beast. So with that, I say thank you, everyone. Check out the Gray Zone. Check out the Gray Zone on their website, on YouTube, on Twitter, on TikTok for the next few days before it gets banned, probably. And follow Max Blumenthal, and you can check out. Where do you sell your books? On Amazon?
Well, you can find them anywhere. Just